Now, before we add more logic, let's work on the user interface, so on what we output. So here I'll return a view in the end, and in that view I want to have a text where I say opponent's guess, so what the computer guessed, and then we can reuse that number container to nicely present that guessed number. So that's a huge advantage of having such reusable components because, well, you can reuse them, I guess. So that's what we're doing here. We'll use that number container again below that opponent's guess text here to have our own number container and nicely output the current guess here. Current guess is our state. Remember, that's what we initialize here and what we'll soon be able to change as well. So that's what's getting output here. Below that, we can now also present maybe our card with two buttons that allow the user to give the computer a hint. So here I'll import card from components card to wrap these buttons in there, and therefore we can already also import button from React Native because we'll need that in a second too. And then simply have our card here, and in that card I want to have a button with a title of lower and another button where we say greater. These are the two directions in which we can give a hint. So is the number you guessed too low? Is it too high? Then we can give the computer a hint with these buttons. And on press, I'll at the moment just register an empty function that doesn't do anything. That will of course soon change and will effectively generate a new random number. And with that, it's now time to add some styles here. I want to have a style for my overall screen. And as before, this will get flex1 to take all the available space on the screen below the header, which we have at the top. Add a padding of 10 to have some space around the content so that it doesn't sit directly on the edges. And also use align items here to center our content horizontally. And that screen property is used on the surrounding view here to add styles screen there so that the content on this overall screen is nicely positioned. Now for these buttons, it would be nice if they would be sitting next to each other. So on the card, we can add a style, maybe use button container as a name here, and therefore add that same name here in our style sheet because that's what we're referring to, and set the flex direction here to row. And we can set a flex direction here because I'm doing this on my card. But if we have a look in that card, we distribute these styles on a view, and a view uses flexbox, so we can set a flex direction here, and that's what I'm doing there. Setting flex direction to row to position items next to each other horizontally. Justify content with space around maybe to have the free space around the buttons on the left and right equally distributed. And also add a margin top of 20 so that this card with our buttons isn't sitting directly next to the guessed number, but there is some spacing in between. And also maybe give this a width of 300 and a max width of 80% to make sure that this can never exceed the boundaries of the parent view. Now, if we save this, it would be nice to see that, and for that we need a way of going to the game screen. Now we're using the start game screen in the app component, so we'll have to use the game screen there as well and manage the selected number in that app component because that's the only component which is on the screen all the time. Well, besides the header, but the app component is also the component which will hold the start game screen and the game screen soon. Therefore, it is the component where we can also pass data down to the start game screen and to the game screen. So let's import the game screen here from screens game screen. And of course, I want to render my game screen here, but not if the start game screen is still visible. I want to have either of the two. And side note, there also is a totally different way of loading different components, and we'll dive into that in a separate module in the navigations module. Now, whilst we'll cover different navigation solutions later, there is a way of rendering either of the two screens right now. We also have a way of only rendering one of these two screens right now already. And for that, we need no special tool or anything like that. We can use normal React logic. We can render this content conditionally. All we need to do for that is we need to manage some state in our app component. We need to manage the selected number in here as well. So I'll add use state here, and then simply use my state here and initialize this with no value in the end. And there I want to get the selected number or the user number and have set user number as an updating function here. And initially that's undefined. And now here I need a function where we can change this, like start game handler. That sounds like a fitting name because we'll have such a number if the user presses the start game button here in the start game screen. So the start game handler will then get the selected number as an input. That's an assumption we have to make here, and set the user number to be that selected number here. Now, whenever that is the case, whenever we have a user number, we know that the game is running and we know that we can render the game screen instead of the start game screen. So here we can use a content variable, for example, and say our default content is start game screen. And that is normal React code, as you know it from React for Web 2. You can store components like this in variables and then simply output the variable down there. It's also what we already do in the start game screen with the confirmed output. So start game screen is our default output, but now we can add an if check and check if content is true-ish. That's what this check checks. So it will be false-ish initially if it's undefined. But now, if it is true, we can set content here. Excuse me, not content, the user number. So I check if user number is true-ish. If that is true-ish, then we know a number was selected. It will be undefined and therefore false initially. But if it is true-ish, if a number was chosen, then we'll set the content here to be the game screen. And then we render whatever is in content down there. And that will be either the game screen or the start game screen. So now when we click start game here with a number chosen, this should switch here if, and that's the important thing, if we make sure that the start game handler can be triggered from inside the start game screen. Now for that we use a default React pattern of passing down a reference to this handler to that component. Maybe on the onStartGame prop, that sounds like a fitting name to me. We forward the start game handler, just a reference without parentheses here, just a reference, a pointer at this function. And onStartGame is now a property we can use in the start game screen. So here in the start game screen, when we click on the start game button here, I want to trigger that prop in the end. So here I have onPress, and there in the end I want to execute onStartGame and forward the currently selected number here, which is managed in the state of start game screen. So here I forward this to onStartGame, and onStartGame is bound to the start game handler, which expects and then receives that selected number. So that is how we make sure that clicking that button in the start game screen triggers this method or this function here. And when this function is triggered, we set a user number. This makes sure that content is the game screen, and therefore we should be seeing the game screen. Now, missing piece is that in the game screen, I need the user choice to generate my initial random number and exclude that user's choice correctly for that first random number. And therefore, we need to pass a property named user choice down to the game screen. So we can add the user choice prop here and pass user number, which is the state we're managing in the app component, which is that selected number we're storing in the state here, pass that down to the game screen. So I hope that flow of data is clear. We get that selected number from the start game screen when that button, the start game button, is pressed. We then store it in the state of the app component here in the use number state with the help of set user number. And we then use that user number to pass it down to the game screen, which is only rendered if we have a user number. So if the game is running, if the game was started, so that in the game screen, we can use the user number, which is received on the user choice prop, to then generate a new random number which the computer guessed where this user choice, this user number is excluded, so that for the very first computer guess, the computer can't instantly guess the user's number. A lot of talking. Let's save all of that and have a look at it. Let's enter 55 and confirm and click start game. And we can't find a variable on start game. So the problem here is that I execute, that should be props on start game here on the start game button in the start game component. Because of course that's a property we're getting. It's not a function defined in here, it's defined on the props. It's this prop in the end. So, small mistake, let's try it again. After fixing this, click start game, and that's looking good. Now we see the opponent's guess. We can give some hints here, which right now have no effect, but which soon will have an effect. And therefore we're on the next screen, we're in the game screen. Now let's make sure we actually can give the computer some hints here and make sure that the computer has a chance of solving this and of guessing our number.